Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is actually my October wrap-up. I am very fast at getting this out. I just have to say that because some months I literally wait until the very last possible second. But here we are. We're doing my October wrap-up, so let's go ahead and get into it. We'll talk about briefly some stats for the month, and then I will go over the books that I read. So for the month of October, I read 20 books, which is pretty good for me. That's pretty standardish. I think it would be rare for me to not hit 20 books a month, at least. Most of the books that I read are audiobooks, and I work where I can listen to them throughout the day, so I do get a lot of reading done that way. Thank goodness for audiobooks. They're a lifesaver and a huge mood booster of mine. I love and adore them. So, I read 7 historical romance, 9 contemporary romance, that's including dark romance or, anything that might be a contemporary, and 4 paranormal romance, which kind of was shocking to me. I thought I would have read more because it was spooky season. So, 4 of the books that I read were ARCs, that's advanced review copies. 17 of them were on audio, and 3 of them were physical. I only read 3 physical books for the month, which isn't really shocking to me, but every time I look at that, I'm like, wow, I hardly read any books physically. I just honestly struggle to have the time to do that. But, okay. Now, this is a new stat that I'm adding in. I am trying to see how many books that I read from the TBR video that I made, although I didn't keep track of how many books I put on that TBR video for October. I read 7 books from that TBR video, so that's pretty good. I had 9 books that were 5 stars, I had 6 books that were 4 star, I had 5 books that were 3 star, and I had 2 books that I DNF'd. So the DNFs I am not including in my total for books read because I didn't finish them. So let's go ahead and get into briefly a little bit of what I read, a little description, how I felt about it, and star rating. So the first book that I read for the month was A Reckless Match by Kate Bateman. This was an ARC. This is a historical romance, and this is actually a really sweet one, and this is up high on the list of some of my favorite historical romance releases for this year. However, I still only gave this one a 4-star review. There have only been a few books. I think there's only been 3 new releases. No, there's been 4 new releases of historical romances this year that I have given 5 stars. So, haven't absolutely fallen in love with them, but the ones that I have loved, I loved a whole lot. So I'm very excited for my end of the year videos where we can talk about those books that I've read. So, this book was really fun. It had a really interesting premise. This is basically, we have 2 feuding families who have this agreement. They have land that joins up right next to each other, that if they don't meet on the equinox at that land to shake hands, then one family forfeits their land to the other, which is kind of an interesting little plot twist that I hadn't read before. So it just so happens that this year it's our hero and heroine who end up meeting their children of their parents. This is the first time they've come here to meet and shake hands. And the heroine's family is really hoping that the hero's family doesn't show up because they're very poor, they're really struggling, and they just want his land. So they meet there to shake hands, and then events happen that throw them together as they're trying to figure out something that is happening with their land. They find this basically like hidden resource that is very, very, very valuable, and it is all sorts of adventurous hijinks ensue around that. So I really liked this book. I felt like the couple had a great connection. It had some really romantic moments. It had a wonderful steamy scene in a cave, which was probably my favorite part of the book. I really loved that. But I do feel like at times the plot took over of the romance. That's really the only complaint that I have. And because that's happened here, I feel like that's such a difficult balance to strike where you have just enough plot and just enough romance to keep me personally satisfied. It was a little bit off here, but I definitely could see how that wouldn't bother other people. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 star. Really liked it. Definitely impressed enough to continue on in the series. So the next book that I read was Ruthless Creatures by J.T. Gessinger. This is a mafia romance, and this book is extremely hyped. Everybody that I have heard talk about this book basically loves it. So I had very high expectations going into this book, and I don't think that that did me any favors because I didn't really end up loving this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I feel like there were definitely some good things in here where I can see why this is so hyped and so well loved, but it didn't really pay off for me enough emotionally, or it wasn't really a great payoff for me in a satisfying way. but I could also see why it's so well loved, but it just missed the mark on a few things that are very typical to my reading taste. So this book is basically about our heroine, who is sort of in a kind of a bad mental state. She's not really happy. She's kind of struggling. She was engaged to be married to her fiance 5 years before, and he just ended up disappearing. And so she had everything all planned and ready. She had her wedding dress and everything, and he disappeared. She has no idea what happened to him. He just like literally vanished, and she doesn't know if he's dead or if he's alive or what happened. So you can imagine the mental toll that must have taken on her to sort of live with that and not really know why he left her and why he just disappeared. Into town comes our hero, who is a very delicious hero. He was really my favorite part of this book. He was absolutely gone for the heroine, just completely obsessed with her. He's there for a very mysterious purpose that we don't find out until later on in the book, which is crucial to the plot of the whole book. So I'm not going to reveal that here, but he's basically watching our heroine, and he has plans for her. And they're not necessarily good plans, like they're nefarious plans, but he ends up being so overwhelmed with desire for her that he ends up basically trying to seduce her and get into bed with her. So my only problems, but they were a big problem for me, is that I felt like this book was so much about their lust and so much about their attraction that any really interesting plot developments, which I felt like this had potential to really have an interesting story, and any real emotional development in their relationship was very much lacking. It relied purely on the heat. It was overloaded with sex scenes. I love steam, right? I will let you guys know if I feel like there's great steam in a book, but I will never love a book where that's the driving force. That's just not the type of reader that I am, and that I feel like is what happened here. It was very much driven by their lust and by the steam, pages and pages and pages where I just ended up skimming it and was kind of bored. So I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars, and I feel really bad because I know lots of people love this, but I'm sorry, that's how I feel. Okay, the next book that I read was The Widow of Rose House. This is a historical romance that is basically a gothic historical romance. It's a Gilded Age romance, and it has some really great eerie and spooky vibes. This is really an excellent time of year to read this around Halloween. The basic premise of this book is that our heroine is recently widowed, and so she had a very, very unhappy and abusive marriage, and she is finally able to, what she feels like is to reclaim her own life. So she comes back to New York, and she decides she's going to start living her own life. She ends up securing a book deal for, it's kind of a funny, it's really cute, I think, for a project she wants to work on, which is basically renovating the Lothair house. And it's this really rundown house, and she's supposed to be renovating it in a way that would appeal to the middle-class Americans. That's how she got the book deal. But she doesn't know that Lothair house has a lot of sort of bad vibes around it. People think it's haunted. Nobody wants to live there. Nobody wants to work on that. And she is very skeptical of that. But sooner or later, she realizes that there might be some truth to the haunted house myth, and so she ends up finding a professor, our hero, who comes from a family of very famous scientists, who is a specialist in, like, electricity and things like that, and he is positive he can find out what is wrong with this house, and he can fix it. So they end up thrown together in that way, and it's their romance. It was really, really great. I loved the chemistry that they had. I really loved the eerie, spooky vibes. I do feel like they got together and the mystery of the house was solved a little too quickly, and then the tension really sort of dropped off for me. But it was still a really enjoyable read, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is the xhex. So I was very, very, very excited for this, a contemporary paranormal witchy romance. I was dying for it. So the basic premise here is our heroine who has a breakup with her boyfriend, and she doesn't really know how to deal with that, so she does what, you know, most young witches would do. She gets drunk with her friend, she lights this basically like a cheap orchard-scented candle, and she puts a hex on him. She doesn't think anything's gonna happen with that. She doesn't really think it was a real hex, and she just kind of forgot about it and lived on with her life. A few years pass. The hero, who is a powerful warlock, comes back into town, the man that she put a hex on, to do something with the ley lines. And when he's here, some really strange and funny things start happening around the town that really revolve around him, and she starts to realize that maybe the hex she put on him actually worked. So I really had high expectations for this book too. I was ready to be wowed, and I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. This felt just a little too tame in all aspects, tame on the romance, tame on the witchy vibes and the mystery, and it just left me feeling pretty unsatisfied. It was a little underwhelming, and I just didn't really love it. There's not necessarily anything wrong with it, like nothing that I could pinpoint and say I hated this, other than just my overall feeling of this was just like, it's fine, it's okay. I'm not really going to recommend it. 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Lothair by Kresley Cole. This is part of her Immortals After Dark series. This is probably the most hyped Immortals After Dark book in the entire series. It is all about Lothair, who is the enemy of old, a very lethal old evil vampire who is determined to get his fated mate, who is a sorceress, that he believes is entrapped in a human's body. So he captures the human, and he is determined to do whatever it takes to get his fated mate's spirit to take control of that body so that he can have her, because a big part of the series, if you didn't know, is that they are fated mates. They are very much drawn to each other, and the males have to have their fated mate. So little does he know that he is actually maybe, possibly, who knows, falling in love or fated mates with the human, or is it the sorceress spirit who's overtaking her body? So I had very high expectations for this one because of the hype surrounding it. I did really enjoy it, honestly. I felt like this is a solid read. I don't think this is the strongest book in the series. I felt like he wasn't quite as evil and dark as he had been set up to be in previous books, and I also felt like there were portions of this that were surprisingly slow for Kresley Cole standards. Like, usually she keeps me on the edge of my seat. I can't put the book down. I have to know what happens next, and I felt like this one was a little bit lacking there. So I did really enjoy this, but I did give it 4 out of 5 stars. I think there are stronger books in the series, but still a very enjoyable read. I adore Kresley Cole in this whole series. Okay, the next book that I read is Confessions of a Dangerous Lord by Elisa Braden. This is part of her Rescue from Ruin series. I really love this series. I think Elisa Braden is a very talented writer. She's become one of my favorite historical romance writers, and I have loved pretty much every book in this series except for this one. So I gave this book 3 stars, and I was pretty disappointed with it, and largely that disappointment comes from the hero's actions. And sometimes if a hero behaves in a way that really makes me hate him and really makes me question, would they really have a love match, then the whole book is just ruined for me. And that's exactly what happened here when we have a hero and a heroine who were childhood friends. And they were very close friends, and she has been out in seasons for a few years now that they're grown up, and she's having a lot of trouble finding a match, finding a husband. And she's starting to really question herself, and am I not pretty enough? Does nobody want me? I don't understand what's going on. Well, lo and behold, the hero is actually the one who is responsible for her not securing a match. He's going around and sabotaging all of her potential suitors because he wants her for himself. However, he is not willing to marry her, and he writes that off as, well, I'm trying to protect you. He is involved in this big nefarious plot that would put her in danger, but I gotta tell you, that's one of my least favorite plot devices in a historical romance. I get so tired of the hero not wanting to be with the heroine because he's trying to protect her, he's trying to save her, and I feel like it's very selfish motives. I feel like a hero that is doing this type of thing where he's really hurting the heroine, hurting her future, hurting her own opinion of herself, really causing her to doubt and wonder, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't anybody like me? Like, it just upsets me so much, and I cannot get on board with that hero. If a hero is that selfish, I don't feel like he's going to really love her, and I don't believe their love story. So I gave this 3 stars because it's Elisa Braden, but honestly, the hero made me so angry that I feel like this is probably closer to a 2. But I can't bring myself to give Elisa Braden a 2-star review, so 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was In Bed with the Highlander. This was our pick for October for the Rake Appreciation Society. This is a historical romance book club that I do with my dear friend Jen from the Book Refuge, and this is a Highlander romance, and I honestly really enjoyed this. It wasn't perfect by any means. There were definitely some things that the hero did that I was like, man, did you really have to do that? Especially regarding their wedding night, wedding afternoon, wedding 2 minutes. However, as the story progressed, he really grew on me, and I really loved their relationship. So this was a 4-star read for me. It's basically about a heroine who is the illegitimate daughter of a king. She has run away to try and avoid this marriage that she doesn't want to be in and to just live her own life and be safe. She ends up coming across the son of our hero, and she tries to protect him. She gets captured by an evil laird who's trying to marry her for power and political gain, but she ends up escaping and she's rescued by our hero, brought into their clan and family, becomes a full part of that whole society. She's very well loved, and it is basically their romance. And honestly, like, I really enjoyed this. I felt like this was a very solid read, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, and then we have one of my favorite books of the month, which was The Love Hypothesis. Oh my gosh, y'all. This is a 6-star read for me. This is one of my favorite books of the year. I absolutely loved this. This was so fun. It was so swoony. It was so romantic. I enjoyed this reading experience so much that I honestly couldn't see anything to critique. So I feel like sometimes I have a reading experience like that where I get so swept away in the storytelling and in the romance that even if I'm sure there are things I could critique, they weren't enough to bother me and detract from my reading experience. So 6 stars. Loved this book. Oh my gosh, I enjoyed it so much. This is basically, we have our hero who's a very grumpy, broody professor at a university, very intelligent. He's very advanced in science and everything like that. And we have our grad student there who meets him, and she ends up sort of confronting him one day and just basically kisses him in order to convince her friend that she's in a relationship with him so that her friend won't think she's pining after this boy she used to date because her friend wanted to date that boy. So they enter into a fake relationship. It's adorable. It is slow burn, but it is one of the most satisfying love stories that I've ever read. It's funny in parts. It's heartwarming in parts. It was just perfect in my opinion. I loved it. This, of course, is based on some Raylo fan fiction, and he is literally Adam Driver. I love this book so much. 6 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was also one of my favorites of the month, and it is There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This is a very dark romance, and I would say this is more dark than it is romance. This is really more of a character study into the psyche of our hero and his opponent, and even our heroine. This is a serial killer romance, basically, where we have Cole, who is our hero, and his opponent, who is... They're both artists at the top of their game in San Francisco. They are extremely powerful men, and nobody would ever cast any blame that anything they might do would be wrong. They're both serial killers, and they are in this sort of game, this rivalry game, to see who can out-top the other. And they end up having a art gallery opening one night, and our heroine, Mara, walks in. So Alastair Shaw is the rival artist. He notices that Cole, the hero, has noticed Mara and is kind of watching her. And so Shaw takes her and does some pretty terrible things to her and sets it up for Cole to find, so that he's hoping that he will kill her or do something with her. And that is how their whole game of cat and mouse begins. This book was fantastic. It was absolutely everything that I could ever want in a serial killer romance. Like, the thing that I really loved about this book was just the in-depth look into their psyche. Like, it was fascinating to see Cole's reactions and his thought process as he very, very slowly evolved from a very cold, unfeeling psychopath to having these outbursts and these moments where he was feeling things that he didn't know he was capable of feeling, that all centered around Mara. Now, I will say there's not really anything necessarily gushy, lovey, romantic about this, but he's obsessed with her, wants to own her and also protect her, but you always have this question throughout the whole book of, he's very obsessed with her, but does he want to kill her? Or does he want to keep her as his? And it's just completely fascinating. It blew my mind. I am so impressed with Sophie Lark as an author after this. I thought this was fantastic. One of my favorite books of the year. Again, 5 out of 5 stars. Maybe even 6 stars? I don't know. I loved it. It's a masterpiece. Okay, the next book that I read is Falling Out of Hate with You by Lauren Rowe. This is a contemporary romance. This is a rock star romance, and this is part 1 in a duet. This basic premise is that our hero and heroine are both in rock bands. Our heroine is in the band that is like opening for the hero's band, and they have this sort of rivalry, this not really hatred. They're not really enemies to lover so much as maybe they're just like antagonistic towards each other, you know, like they don't necessarily get along, they don't like each other, but they also don't like have a reason to be enemies. Like there's literally no reason for them to be enemies other than they like gave each other bad looks or something. I don't know. I didn't love this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I felt like their reasons for not liking each other was super weak. Please excuse Kazi in the background. I don't know what he's barking at. Their romance was very much lust-based, and it was honestly just not a real engaging story. I felt like the writing was solid. I'm interested to read more from this author, and I honestly may pick up the next book at some point because this is very much not a contained story. This is the type of duet where it just feels like it's cut in half. You get half of the story, and then you get the other half in the second part, and I really hate that, honestly. I feel like that is so annoying, but didn't love this, didn't hate it, 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is To Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. This is the 5th book in her Bridgerton series, and I am bound and determined to finish this series by the end of the year, for sure. I really love this series. I love the Bridgerton family. I think they're just such comforting, wholesome, fun, enjoyable historical romances. I really, really like them. This one is Eloise's romance with Sir Philip, who is actually the widow of her cousin. Her cousin suffered with depression, specifically probably postpartum depression, and she did attempt suicide. However, she was pulled out of the ocean by Philip, but then she developed an illness and complications from that and ended up passing away. Philip is really struggling with how to be a parent to these 2 children that he's left with, and he ends up striking up a really sweet friendship with Eloise through letters. They're basically pen pals, and he sort of broaches the idea of maybe she should marry him, and so she goes out to visit him, and it's their love story. It's very sweet. It's very romantic. I loved so much about this book, but I did give this 4 out of 5 stars. I felt like I really wasn't happy with the mental health representation in here. Like, I feel like it is painful and dangerous to talk about people who have depression the way that it was talked about here. I just really didn't love that, so 4 out of 5 stars. But it was still like a very lovely, very romantic book, and honestly, I really enjoy this series. Okay, and then I carried on in my Night Huntress reread. So I've been rereading this series starting in September. This is like my OG paranormal romance series that I started reading about 10 years ago. Loved it so much, so I am carrying on in that. And I want to get to her newer books, and I just felt like in order to do that, I kind of needed to refresh my memory of the world. And honestly, it's been so long since I read these books that I remember big plot points, but there's a lot that I've forgotten. So the first one that I read this is At Gravesend. So this is book 3 in the series, and this book is very much cat and bones, and they're basically fighting all the paranormal dangers that come across in their lives. They are a couple, cat and bones, and something that I really, really love about this series as it progresses is watching them sort of face the challenges that come their way as an established couple. I think that's really beautiful. In this one, we have a woman, a paranormal woman from Bones' past who is out to kill him, and it is very surprisingly emotional at times. I was near tears towards the end at the final scene, and it was beautiful. I really loved it. This was a 5-star read for me. Tons of fun. Highly recommend this series. And then I carried on with book number 4, which is Destined for an Early Grave. And this book has a twist on that where they're fighting paranormal creatures, but this time it's someone who is after Kat, and he is basically able to communicate with her in dreams. He's a very powerful vampire, and he's sort of planted this thought that he is actually Kat's husband, not Bones. And he's planting these thoughts in her mind, and she's starting to question, is he? Did I really marry him and not Bones? Is this real? Is this not? It was a really enjoyable read. Very beautiful. Very, very heart-wrenching at times. 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, and then I read Art and Soul by Brittany C. Cherry. This is a contemporary romance, and this was absolutely beautiful. I gave this book 5 stars. This book follows our heroine, who is an art student. She's in high school. She's 16 years old. And she has made a decision that is going to affect her life permanently. She starts being outcast by her friends at school. She starts getting made fun of, called names, whore, slut, things like that, and it's really affecting her. She already was sort of on the fringes of social society with basically one best friend and not a lot else. A new boy moves into town, and he is just this golden sunshine of a young man, and he sees the good in her, and he sort of becomes her champion, and it's their love story. This was very, very beautiful. They do not progress past the high school age. This is zero steam in here, but it was just absolutely a heart-achingly sweet, beautiful coming-of-age romance, and I loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, and then I read another one of my favorite books of the month, and it is The Lady Gets Lucky by Joanna Shupe. This is a new release. This is a historical romance set in the Gilded Age, and it follows our hero and heroine, Kit and Alice. Alice is a bit of a wallflower. She is really wanting to secure a marriage so she can have some freedom for her very overbearing mother. She wants to move out and live her own life. Her mother is so cruel to her. It was painful at times to read how she treats Alice. It was just heartbreaking. And so you feel right along with Alice this urgency she has to marry and to get out from underneath her terrible mother. She sees Kit, who she knows to be a rake and a ladies' man, and she approaches him and says, "Hey, could you give me seduction lessons so I can land a husband?" And he's like, "No, you need to stay away from me. You're a good girl. I'm a bad boy. No." But he wants to open a supper club, and he's trying to secure a chef to come and cook for him. And Alice is actually very interested in cooking, which ladies didn't do at that time. She has become a student of the chef that he wants to secure for his supper club. Secretly, her mother doesn't know, and so she says, "If you give me these lessons, I will give you one of these recipes that the chef taught me how to make. In exchange, that can be my payment." That tempts Kit so much that he agrees, and they start having seduction lessons. This book was beautiful. It was so freaking beautiful. The tension in here between these two, the sexual tension, the chemistry in here was off the charts. There was such beautiful, very subtle, steamy scenes in here. Like, they have a very, very sexy makeout scene. It was so great. Like, the tension in here just kept rising, and I was like dying. I wanted them to be together so bad. I wanted them to be happy, and I just loved it. This had a perfect ending. I love what the hero did to win her over in the end. I adored this book. This is my #1 historical romance release in 2021. I loved it so much. Can't recommend it highly enough. It's definitely going to be in my top list of the year. Okay, and the next book that I read was Take by Pam Godwin. This is book 5 in her Deliver series. This is very, very, very dark romance series about sex trafficking and slaves and how they could get free and how they can bring this network down. This book follows Tiago, who is basically operating a ring of crime, and he is a little bit of a sadistic type of hero in that he captures people and he is very brutal with them, and he creates scars in them with knives and cutting and things like that. And for him, that's a way for him to have some therapy. It's therapeutic for him. And he ends up kidnapping our heroine, and he puts her through some really awful things. But she is one of the strongest heroines that I've ever read. I really, really loved their very complicated relationship dynamic. I felt like this book addressed so many important and really thought-provoking ideas about how different people and different circumstances that they've been in, how that can affect how they behave around other people, and finding a person who that resonates with, that they could love and have a happy life with. I feel like the beauty of these books by Pam Godwin is that it shows people that have experienced extreme levels of darkness, and it shows how they cope with that, sort of coping mechanisms that they bring forward, that they use to deal with the life they've been dealt in as positive of a way as they can. And then they find someone who loves them and is either willing to work with them or sees them for who they are. And I just love that so much. I love when you have somebody who is very dark, very damaged, and isn't really going to change, and you have their love interest come into the picture and love them anyway as they are. I think that's just really, really powerful, and I love that message, and I feel like that's what romance is all about, and I just love that so much. So I gave this book 5 stars, adored it, freaking loved it. Okay, and then I read The Heir by Sophie Lark. This is book 1 in her Kingmaker Chronicles. This is a contemporary romance, and this is a spin-off of her Brutal Birthright series where we have the children of all of those couples in this series. So we have them attending the Kingmaker School, which is basically a boarding school set in some, I think maybe Russia, I'm not sure exactly what country it's in. it's basically like a Hogwarts for mafia kids, where it's that type of a very removed boarding school situation. And I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I felt like it was extremely clever, very unique. I really loved the characters. I really loved the setup. I felt like it was tense. It had great suspense. It had really beautiful romance and some extremely beautiful steam in this book. And it was a very interesting character study into Dean, who I know features in future books as a bully. I just loved this. I loved it so much. This was one of my favorite books of the month, and I gave it 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Unraveling Him by Claire Kingsley. This is a contemporary romance. This is a small town romance, Grumpy versus Sunshine, and it was so delightful. This was another one of my top reads of the month. If I had to pick 5 reads that were my favorites of the month, it would be The Love Hypothesis, The Lady Gets Lucky, The Heir, Unraveling Him, and what would be the other one? And There Are No Saints would be the last one. Like, those are the books that really stand out to me. Those are my top 5 reads of the month. I love those. I thought they were fantastic, and I think it's really cool that 2 of them are by Sophie Lark, who I started reading her books, and I liked her books, but I wasn't, like, obsessed with them like I feel like a lot of people are. But the more books that I read by Sophie Lark, the more I see, like, how amazing of a writer she is. Okay, anyway, sorry for that little side rant about Sophie Lark. So, Unraveling Him, small town romance. This was the book that Smart Women Read Romance picked for their Patreon book review, and so it was kind of like a last-minute, spur-of-the-moment read. I wasn't really planning on it, but I had just DNF'd a book, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and I needed something that was going to pick me up, and this was perfect. This was a 5-star read. This hero is so grumpy and so broody, and he is just so drawn to the heroine, who is this feisty, sunshiny woman who loves houseplants. She gives them old lady names. She carries them with her in her car. And he has a dog who hates everyone except for her. And it was just so beautiful. Like, I adored this book. I thought it was fantastic. 5 out of 5 stars. Really loved it. Okay, and the next book that I read is Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. This is the beginning of a new small town romance series by her. So this book is basically about our heroine who comes into this very small town where her grandfather is the mayor, and he has told her all you need to do as the new sheriff in town is to win the family of the Edens over. And so she's like very nervous to be a female sheriff in this small town. On one of her first nights in town, she is at a bar and she meets this beautiful, gorgeous man who is described as Brad Pitt from Legends of the Fall, which I loved. And they have insane chemistry and they end up having a one-night stand. Lo and behold, that man is Griffin Eden. And now she feels like, oh no, oh no, oh no, what have I done? So they sort of circle each other. They have a little bit of animosity. He's not really ready to open up to her, and she's sort of feisty and a little bit abrasive of like, let me do my job, I'm doing a good job. And there's also a mystery in here involving the deaths of young women who they claim to be suicides as they jump off of Indigo Ridge, that everything shows that it was a suicide. However, our heroine thinks that it's not adding up, and so she's trying to seek out what exactly caused these deaths. I really loved this small town setting. I loved our characters. I felt like they had really good chemistry. I did feel like they went from attraction to deeper feelings, like, choop, really quickly with no sort of, like, how they got there, you know? Like, it just didn't feel very authentic to me. It felt a little too rushed. And I will say the reason I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars is I felt like Devney Perry did an excellent job of building suspense and building mystery and building tension into this whole question of who killed these young women and why. And I will say that it was pointing towards a character who was so clearly painted as the villain, like red blinking arrows pointing at him as this guy's the villain, that I just thought that can't be the villain. I was wrong. So that was so disappointing to me that honestly it kind of ruined a lot of the book for me, so I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. But I definitely want to continue reading in the series. Okay, and the last book that I read is Rules for Heiresses by Amelie Howard. This was an ARC, this is a new release, and I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think that this had some really interesting characters. I think this had a really interesting plot and premise. It's basically about our heroine who is a very wealthy, privileged heiress, and she is determined she's not going to marry, and so The only option she thinks she has is to run away. She does run away, disguises herself as a young man, and she ends up meeting our hero who, at basically gambling. They're gambling one night. She ends up losing money to him and he's ready to take his payment. He discovers that she is a woman, and he also discovers that she is his childhood friend. They end up in a compromising situation where they must get married, and the story goes on from there. I really enjoyed the opening scene in here. I think this is one of the most adorable meet cutes that I've ever read. I thought it was so fun and just really enjoyable. Really loved that. I really loved our heroine too. I felt like she was just feisty and plucky enough, but also had this quality about her where she was willing to try and do anything to make this marriage work. I really, really liked that about her. But our hero definitely was one of those heroes who is very cold towards her for no apparent reason, and then he'll be hot towards her because he's so attracted to her, and then he'll shut himself off again, close down, give her the cold shoulder, and I just hate heroes like that. Like, I get so tired of reading about these men who cause this type of emotional trauma to the women in their life that they have feelings for, but because they don't want to confront those feelings or address them, they sort of put all of that work on the heroine. I just really get tired of that, so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is definitely not the worst in that vein that I've read, but it was enough of an irritation to me that I'm just like, I can't give this 5 stars because I just get really sick of the hero who does all of this emotional trauma to the heroine when she's so willing and so ready to try and love him and make this marriage work. I just hate it. I get so tired of that. So 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, now the 2 DNFs that I had. One of them was A Gentleman Undone by Cecilia Grant. This is a historical romance. I talked about this a lot in my reading vlog. This book was not for me at all. This is basically about a heroine who is a courtesan. She's a kept woman. She's not very beautiful, but she is extremely intelligent. She's very knowledgeable and talented at playing cards, and she's trying to get enough money to buy her freedom. And our hero is the only one who sees her intelligence in that way. So I felt like this was going to be a great book for me. Like, I'd heard really good things about it. I was positive I would love it. Unfortunately, the writing style in here was definitely not for me. It was beautiful writing. It was very thought-provoking writing, but because of that, the way the author leaned into the words and creating words that you could talk about and discuss and break down, the story really suffered. Like, very much suffered. It moved so slowly, and I just honestly couldn't read it anymore, so DNF'd that book. The other book that I DNF'd is actually an arc, and I don't DNF arcs. Like, even if I'm not fully loving a book, I will almost always read it because I asked for this arc, and I feel bad if I don't. However, I knew that if I finished reading this book, it was going to be a 1-star read for me. And that is Dangerous Temptations by Gianna Darling. So I only read a few chapters in this book, but I'll tell you right now, the things that didn't work for me was the hero. He was a grade A a-hole, and I can honestly get behind some a-hole heroes, but you've got to make them complex. You can't just make them a dick just because. Like, I need to know a little bit more of why they operate like that, and I need there to be some reasoning and understanding about their behavior. Now, granted, maybe we got that, but honestly, that wasn't the only thing that was bothering me, although that was a big thing, but probably the reason that I DNF'd this book, and y'all can call me a prude if you want, that's fine, but like, I cannot read about a 17-year-old girl experiencing some very powerful sexual responses to a very much older man who is involved with her mother. Like, I know, right? Like, that's the appeal of this. This is a taboo book. That's going to be part of the appeal. And I really wanted to like this. I wanted to give it a try. I wanted to see, like, I asked for this arc because I thought I would like it. And I did not at all. At all. Like, the combination of this complete dick of a hero and this very young, vulnerable young girl, and how their relationship was just so extremely sexual was just like, I can't do it. So I DNF'd it. I didn't rate it anywhere, but yeah, I just couldn't do it. No. So I thought I'd let y'all know. That was a no for me. A big no. No thank you. All right, there we have it. Those are the books that I've read. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you so much, my friends, for being here with me, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in future videos.